2015 regular council meeting to order. In the absence of our council president, David Mahan, I would like to entertain a motion to elect a president pro tem.
So moved.
I'll nominate Stan Peterson.
I'll second it.
All right, are there any further motions? Nominations? Last chance? All those in favor?
It was tough, Stan, but
I guess we need to start the meeting off with the flag salute. Council Rowe, could you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call.
Silent roll call has been taken and a quorum is present.
We need a motion for approval of the minutes for the June 17th, 29th, 30th meeting in 2015 special council meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Any petitions, communications, or citizens' requests that are not on the agenda tonight? Reports. Council President's absent, so we're not going to hear from him. Standing committees. City councilors. City attorney. Special committees. School board liaison. City manager.
Meeting next Monday on pre-construction on the runway. Just a reminder, 4 bids came in. Sargent's was a low bidder at $3.5 million on the 2 runways. Coming up in at our next meeting, Kiwanis annually requests that they can get a pass for the transfer station. That'll be coming up at the next meeting. It's one of the non-profits to go in there. I reported out a couple meetings ago that we had a bad pump on the pumper. That has all come back now, and that came in with an $11,000 bill to fix that pump. The impeller caused a lot of damage when it broke off inside that. Probably what I'll do is come back and ask if we can take that out of heavy equipment reserve to fund that. It's a major capital. Typically the maintenance stuff that Steve asked for in the fire department is a broken spring or something, not a $11,000 pump. So Environmental and Natural Resources Committee, there were a bunch of bills that came in during this past session. They're going to be having 3 meetings this fall. Some of the things I'll be talking about there is to encourage source reduction, more recycling. They're going to be talking about waste processing and future of landfills in general. They'll be having those meetings this fall. Probably any new bills coming in the winter session here. And there is a paper street at 18 Chapman Street that the Housing Authority would like to come back and get the city to give to them. It's right now used as a driveway into the building that they have. They'd like to acquire that piece because then that would make the property they have next door all one piece. So that'll be something once we get that ironed out exactly what they're looking for, we'll bring that back. That's it.
Any questions? Thank you. There is no consent agenda tonight, so that moves us to public hearings and second readings of ordinances. Second readings. The City Council will conduct a second reading for final approval on a proposal to amend Chapter 24, Solid Waste Facilities of the Old Town Code of Ordinances. The proposed changes are housekeeping measures to comply with the new state laws and moves the application review process from the City Council to the Planning Board. You could sit if you like.
Well, that's okay. I should come over and stand up. I sat all the way here. Well, good evening. My name is Jim Katsafikis. I'm an attorney at Perkins Thompson in Portland and special counsel for the solid waste issues for the city of Old Town. Before you tonight is a matter of a second reading and adoption of these amendments to Chapter 24. As is mentioned, there are a couple of basic reasons for this. If we go back just a little ways, just to set the stage on this, back in 2003, the legislature created the Juniper Ridge landfill as a state-owned landfill and set in motion the process by which Casella is now the contract operator. There's a company, NewsMe is the abbreviation, which operates it in concert with the state, which owns it. The Bureau of General Services manages the landfill on behalf of the state. The reason I mention that is it's important to note what's before you is an amendment to an ordinance that was negotiated between 2005 and 2009 and enacted in 2009. So we're not changing the rules. We're simply amending the rules that were agreed upon, that were worked out in many public meetings before this council. So this isn't a new thing that's before the council tonight. It is an amendment, largely housekeeping, to an existing ordinance that was hashed out over quite a period of time in a public setting with lots of public input. The other point I'd want to make is this. There are limits on the city's ability to regulate this facility. It's not wide open. We can't regulate its general operation. What the city is limited to under the Maine legislature's resolve in 2003 is to regulating expansions of the landfill. And I'll quote from it because the language is important. We're barred from regulating the operation except that the municipality may enact ordinances with respect to the operation of any expansion of the disposal facility, including any expansion of the type of waste the facility is licensed to accept. That contains standards a municipality finds reasonable, including without limitation standards concerning conformance with federal and state solid waste rules, fire safety, traffic safety, levels of noise heard outside the facility, distance from existing residential, commercial, or institutional uses, groundwater protection, surface water protection, erosion and sedimentation control, and compatibility with local zoning and land use controls, as long as these standards are not more stringent, more strict than those that are in state law, the Site Location of Development Law, the Natural Resources Protection Act, and the Maine Solid Waste Management Act, and the rules that are under those statutes. So we're restricted. We can regulate. The regulation can't be more strict than state law. It has to be in those general areas, which is, it's inclusive without limitation, but we still have to be within that area. We can't go back and come up with hydrogeological standards. That is the state's bailiwick. So we have to be within those areas. That's what was designed here. When you look at Chapter 24, it's regulating the expansion of solid waste facilities, particularly the state-owned one here in Maine, here in Old Town. So what we did was take a look at changes in state law that have happened since 2009, and the big thing that's happened is the old solid waste management regulations were updated for the first time since about 1989 in a major way. So that happened, and more importantly, what we wanted to do was transfer the review authority. This landfill expansion gets 2 reviews. One that it has started already is before the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. When they get that review and approval, assuming they get it, the next step will be to come here. And so they'll be looking for their local approval. The ordinance as written has the city council being the party that reviews it. However, there are a few considerations. The city council doesn't normally review development applications, so this is inconsistent with the task. The city council has a fair amount of other business, I'm sure, too. So to try to devote 3, 4, 5 meetings to public hearings and going through a licensing procedure also would take a lot of resources that could be perhaps better spent elsewhere. And on top of that, this facility, for its redevelopment, may need other planning and zoning permits. So if it needs site plan approval from the planning board, it might make sense for the planning board to be handling both tracks at the same time. So for those reasons, this proposed amendment would transfer the review authority from the city council to the planning board. So those are the major changes that are done.
here to answer any questions you might have, or at least to try to answer them. I know there were a number of questions asked before, which I tried to address by email. I hope that I was able to do that to the satisfaction of the people asking those questions. So with that, unless there's any question right now, I'll sit down and be here as a resource.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ed Spencer. I live on the Kirkland Road. For starters, I'd like to thank Bill Mayo for forwarding my concerns to the City Council and for asking Mr. Katsioufikas to respond to them. I'll repeat what I said, the first time, and in the newspaper and everything else, is I think these things should be passed, and they should be passed tonight. I was trying to turn the ordinance into something better, something more comprehensive, something to avoid basically Casella running stuff through loopholes later on in the process. But as I did a quick count, and when I read through the 44 pages or whatever it was, I had, with Chuck Lighthizer help, I had 33 points. And it turned out that we were okay with like half a dozen of them. That's fine, no problem. And there's another 10 things about 10 that the City Council could, probably address or might be able to address later. So, like I said, my disagreements are small compared to the bulk of the ordinance, which I think is good. So I'm in support. I don't think we need to argue point by point, but I do have a couple of questions and comments. And some of them are like, I look, and there's a common theme with me is allow more time for notices. If the landfill has to give the state information on this date, in this day and age, why don't they just send it to the City of Old Town on the same date? Why should we have to wait? And when an application or some kind of issue is presented, it can be like between a week before and a week after. Hey, let's do it before it happens. Let's at least give notice to our advisory committee about what's coming up. As far as I understand the regulation that our rules can't be stricter than the state's, but I'm not sure when you read these regulations if the state's regulations are as strict as they could possibly be. You know what I'm saying? So saying, we can't be stricter than state law allows kind of assumes that the state is going, as strict as they can. But that's, for amateur lawyer speak, from people like me. So a couple of things I'd like for clarification is if this passes tonight, when does it actually take effect? 10 days. Well, I think there was some language in there about, is it when the application is presented? And I'll give them a minute to look that up. And the other thing is, has the expansion application, I would think I would have heard if it had been presented yet. I'm not sure if it has been presented. And the other thing, a lot of my things dealt with things like litter, things like just requiring trucks to be washed, you know, before they leave the site, because they're dumping some really nasty stuff, and that might be a good example of the state could demand that, but they gave it away. You know, they just gave in and said, no, you don't have to do it. Well, it might be a time to say, and it could be, you know, just not for every load, but for some things like sewage sludge, just for example. But I think that in here is, I think, the basis for something called a waste hauler's license, which I think is a great idea. And maybe things like fugitive litter, dirty trucks leaving the site, and you know, I don't know if you know, if you want to charge these people a fee or what the rules are for doing that. To me, that would be secondary to just knowing who they are, what they're hauling, where it came from, you know, and what they, you know, what they did each time they bring a load in. For example, I know in Rhode Island, every truck driver has to sign that this load originated within the state of Rhode Island. And I understand they have one landfill and the state owns it, and that's the rule there. So I think you know, if you develop a waste hauler's license, that, you know, a lot of things could be taken care of there. So so basically that's about it. One more thing, channeling Columbo here. That I do think that you know, I accept Mr. Katsufikis' explanation, but I do think our state waste hierarchy should be mentioned in it, because that is, it's the law, you know, in the state, and we have to, I think, accept the fact that sometimes the state doesn't want to enforce its own regulations. So if we have it in there, then, you know, it just clarifies what the situation is. And all you're doing is restating what the state rules are. So at that, I'd say if I can get my questions answered, I'd be willing to sit down and say, let's vote tonight and get this on the books.
I want to respond in part to one of Mr. Spencer's questions concerning what applications this ordinance will apply to once it's approved and when it takes effect. The charter is clear that the ordinance takes effect 10 days after it's passed, so it'll be in effect 10 days from tonight. However, the law courts made an interesting distinction between the effective date of the ordinance and the applicability of the ordinance. The default rule in Maine by statute is, if you don't say anything about applicability in the ordinance, any application that is pending when the ordinance is enacted is not subject to that ordinance. Any application that's been filed, duly filed, and has received its first substantive review is not affected by the ordinance. But that's only a rule of construction. You can change that with appropriate language in the ordinance. You can make the ordinance apply to any applications that are pending at the time it's passed that have not received final approval. And I'll turn to Jim and ask him to say whether or not that provision's in there. But there is that distinction, even though the ordinance may not take effect for 10 days, once it takes effect, if the right language is in the ordinance, it will apply to any application that's currently pending.
Or one that hasn't been filed.
Or one that hasn't been filed, yes.
Yes.
Let's try to answer Mr. Spencer's questions.
Sure.
and to follow up on that. I think let's get the applicability and the effective date issue out of the way first. Yes, any ordinance amendment 10 days under the charter, it becomes effective. This ordinance applies to any application, any person who seeks to start a new landfill or alter or expand a landfill. The tortured provision on page 40 with regard to exceptions goes toward this. We know that we can't, on its face anyway, under the state law, regulate the existing landfill. But once you build an expansion like this, there is a leachate system that is for the entire facility. At that point, once DEP issues a permit to operate one cell, the first cell of this expansion, then we can regulate leachate for the entire facility, because it's all one system. It's just a bigger one system. So there are some practical things where the expansion requires us to be able to regulate the operation generally. This recognizes it. We don't get to review the system that's there now and tell them you have to change it as part of the expansion, but once the expansion's done and they operate it, we look at how leachate's generated for the whole facility. So it's kind of tortured language, but that's what it was intended to do. That's why we have that. It becomes effective in 10 days. No application's been filed with the city yet. One will be once they're through DEP review. The idea being, we're going to participate in DEP review. We will have understood more about the facility. We're going to be getting a grant to pay for the city's participation. So we will be better educated about the landfill expansion, what it is, before the application comes here, and then the planning board has to review it. Now, as for some of the particular issues raised, the reason why I suggested in my response to Mr. Spencer's question that we don't mention the state hierarchy, twofold. Every time that you incorporate something that's in state law, if the state changes it, then you have to go back and change your ordinance. And I'm still reviewing ordinances that have, from different cities and towns that have references to statutes that were repealed 30 years ago. So, we don't want to go there if we can help it. More importantly, though, the reason the state hierarchy exists, that hierarchy that favors reduction, reuse, recycling, and then puts landfilling at the bottom, US EPA came out with that back in the 1980s. Congress adopted that. The EPA adopted that in its rules. We piggybacked on it back in the 1980s, putting together our state waste management plan. What Bill was reading to you earlier, a memo from the state as far as what the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources will be studying, is looking at whether we want to make changes to the hierarchy the way that US EPA has done recently. Do we want to follow those changes? We had followed them initially. Do we want to take those on now? So I think for us to try to put in an ordinance something that's going to have to keep track of a moving target is probably not a good idea. But more importantly, the reason the hierarchy is there is to control siting decisions, decisions of policy made by the state. What do we want to favor? Do we want to favor reuse, reduction, recycling, waste to energy, landfilling? How do we target that? How do we permit a facility? And now, in the wake of this expansion, public benefit determination, and the MERC permit amendment, the legislature has told DEP when someone comes in for a new permit, you've got to consider the hierarchy. So DEP's looking at that. The state's looking at that. I don't think we need to. We're assuming it's been permitted by the state under the state law. We're looking to see whether it meets our requirements. And that's why we didn't build a hierarchy in then. I'm not recommending we do it now. It will be looked at. Finally, as far as odor, litter, those sorts of things, when the planning board reviews this, they will be looking for a plan. They'll be looking for a plan of how do you operate that facility. How frequently are the trucks going to be washed? What will be done to reduce litter? What will be done for odor control? The applicant's going to have to prove all of that to DEP. We're going to raise all of those issues at that point because those are public concerns for the neighbors, for the city, for all involved. So we'll be raising those issues before DEP. They'll be addressing them. We'll have those reports before the planning board. Conditions of approval that are attached by either board will address those issues. As to the waste hauler license, we built that in as a possibility. In many municipalities that have waste-to-energy facilities where there, or any place where there's a lot of solid waste pickup, you're worried about trucks going over the road. Is there refuse dropping out of them? Are they leaking materials, odor? Are they getting washed out? You don't have to, you may want to license haulers just to make sure that you have something that you can pull if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Not every town does, but several do. So that was built into this as a possibility if you wanted to go there. And that's what Mr. Spencer was referring to. If you'd like to, I'm happy to work with you to put together such an ordinance. But that's why it's mentioned. It's if you have one, it references it. So with that, unless there are any other questions?
Wouldn't that come out of the planning board to us, though?
Not necessarily, I mean, a hauler's license?
Yes.
That would be a separate policy issue, because that's not required. It's something that you might want to do. It's more just a regulatory matter, and councils usually bring that up themselves if they're going to address it. It's not planning and zoning or land use.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just,
Could you step
So-
up to a mic, because
Sure.
we're on TV?
so, do you know at this point if the application to expand has been presented to DEP yet?
Notice was given that they are going to apply, which is why we filed our grant application. I have not seen yet that an application has actually been filed. When that happens, there will be notice, and copies will be available. There should be a copy available right here at City Hall when one comes in, so that you won't be prejudiced. You'll be able to start reviewing materials right then and there.
That's concurs with my information that they haven't done it yet. So, but it is, supposedly going to happen sooner rather than later, which is why it's so important to get this passed tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments from anybody? If not, I close this public hearing. The city will consider final approval on a proposed amendment to Chapter 24 Solid Waste Facilities. Councilor Klitsch, would you do that, please?
Yes. Resolved, the City of Old Town Council hereby approves a proposal to amend Chapter 24 Solid Waste Facilities of the Old Town Code of Ordinances. The proposed changes are housekeeping measures to comply with the new state laws and moves the application review process from the City Council to the Planning Board.
Any discussion? I believe that's a roll call vote.
Need a second.
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 We need a second, sorry. Councilor May?
Yeah, AJ, either one of us, yeah.
Any discussion?
Counselor May?
Yes.
Counselor Peterson?
Yes.
Counselor Roach?
Yes.
Counselor Klitsch?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The Old Town City Council will conduct a second reading for final approval on a proposal to change the official zoning map, specifically tax map 18, lot 21, as shown on Exhibit 1 and further described in Exhibit 2, from R5, low-density multifamily, to C3, highway commercial. This proposal is unanimously approved by the Old Town Planning Board at their June 9th, 2015 meeting. I'd open the council meeting for comments. No comments, I close the meeting. The city will consider final approval on the proposal to change the official zoning map, specifically tax map 18, lot 21, as shown on Exhibit 1, and further described in Exhibit 2, from R5, low-density family, to C3, highway commercial. Councilor Roach?
Resolved, the Old Town City Council hereby schedules a second reading for final approval for July 6, 2015, on a proposal to change the official zoning map, specifically tax map 18, lot 21, as shown on Exhibit 1, and further described in Exhibit 2, from R5 low-density multifamily to C3 highway commercial.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Peterson?
Yes.
Counselor Roach?
Yes.
Counselor Klitsch?
Yes.
Counselor May?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. New business. The city council will consider appointments to several boards and committees. Councilor May.
Resolve, the Old Town City Council hereby appoints the following: to the Sewer Advisory Board, Philip Dunn and Jason Folsom, both terms to expire December 31, 2017. To the Planning Board, Timothy Folster, his term to expire December 31, 2017. And Plumbing Inspector David Russell is a reappointment, and Bill Murphy is the alternate, and both of those terms expire December 31, 2015.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor?